right. Well, welcome to the final round of the national competition. It's good to have all you here. And I know it's been a challenging couple of days, an exciting couple of days, and this chair is not very stable, but that's okay. I'm getting acclimated to my surroundings. All right, well, we're going to have a good round. All right, I'm going to go over a few things. I'm sure you've all heard these before. We've got video cameras all around, so we don't need to really discuss that. Everybody knows about it. I need to remind all of you that no communication, once again, is allowed between the competing team members and others in the courtroom until the trial is concluded. Also, I'm instructed to remind you that the courtroom is not a place where you should be wearing anything that would identify your team, and so I think you've got that mastered by this time. All right, we've got our timekeepers. All right, everybody's set on that. Let's see, our rosters, have those been exchanged?
They have been exchanged between the teams, Your Honor. However, we do have copies for the scoring judges and yourself.
Okay, great. All right, well, why don't we go on and do that at this point? If you want to go on and pass them to whoever, I certainly need them. You can approach them.
Yes, sir, may I approach?
Yeah.
There you are.
Thank you very
You're welcome.
much.
May I go ahead and hand them out to the jury, Your Honor?
Yeah, absolutely. Let's go
Your
on
Honor,
and do
may I
that.
approach as well?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you very much. Okay.
You're welcome.
All right.
You're welcome. Very well.
Okay, I'm going to go on and remind everyone while we're doing that to refrain from answering or using these ubiquitous devices. Go on and turn them off, everybody in here right now. And I'm also going to instruct all of you to turn them off or to place them in silent mode. If you absolutely have to use them, please go outside in the rotunda area to do that. Also, we're going to try to limit the number of times that you're going in and out of the courtroom as much as possible. We want to keep distractions to a minimum. All right, once we're done with this, we'll start. All right. Okay, I'm going to call the case of Athena General Property and Casualty Insurance Company versus Hayden Beauregard and Billy Sherman before the Superior Court of Clark County, Georgia. I am Judge Stephen Lewis Armstrong Dillard. I'm the Chief Judge of the Court of Appeals, sitting by designation in the Superior Court. All right, I'm going to ask at this point each team to introduce its participating members by name and role. Go ahead.
Your Honor, we are Team HEC representing Hayden Beauregard in today's case. Your Honor, members of the jury, my name is Jalia Naghawatha. I'll be conducting the direct examination of Hayden Beauregard, the cross-examination of Billy Sherman, and giving the closing arguments for Mr. Beauregard.
Your Honor, members of the jury, my name is Dominic Mendelik. I will be conducting the direct examination of Elijah Johnston, the cross-examination of E.J. Spengler, as well as giving the opening statement for Mr. Beauregard today.
Good afternoon, Your Honor, members of the jury. My name is Ryan Laughlin. I will be conducting the direct examination of Nolan Clark and the cross-examination of Reagan Bewley.
Your Honor, members of the jury, my name is Mac Adolfo, and I am Hayden Beauregard.
Good afternoon, Your Honor, members of the jury. My name is Christopher Newell, and today I am Nolan Clark.
Hello, Your Honor, members of the jury. My name is Mason Adolfo, and I am Eli Johnson.
Good afternoon, Your Honor, members of the jury. My name is Nathaniel Reyes, and I will be timekeeping today.
All right. Counsel?
Good afternoon, Your Honor. We are Team TVS representing defense for Sherman. My name is Samuel Watley. I will be giving the direct of Mr. E.J. Spengler, as well as crossing Elijah Johnston.
Good afternoon, Your Honor, members of the jury. My name is Josiah Burns. I will be delivering the opening statement in today's case, as well as the direct examination of Reagan Bewley and the cross-examination of Nolan Clark.
Good afternoon, Your Honor, and members of the jury. My name is Ella Sego. I will be cross-examining Hayden Beauregard, directing Billy Sherman, as well as giving the closing arguments.
Good afternoon, Your Honor, members of the jury. My name is Luke Epley. Today I will be portraying E.J. Spengler.
Good afternoon, Your Honor, members of the jury. My name is Asher Black, and I'll be portraying the role of Reagan Bewley.
Good afternoon, Your Honour. My name is Fern Green and I will be playing the role of Billy Sherman.
Afternoon, Your Honor. The jury, and I'll also be teaming time.
All right, thank you. All right, do we have any pretrial matters to
Yes,
cover?
Your Honor.
Okay.
First of all, we'd ask your permission to move about the well of the court within reason, except, of course, when approaching the bench and the witness.
Okay, I'm going to grant you permission to do all of those things in one fell swoop. How
All
about
right.
that?
Al-
And for you as well. How about that?
Thank you, Your Honor.
All right, we're going to cover this quickly. Go ahead.
Also pursuant to Rule 4.9 of the unique rules of this jurisdiction, witnesses, of course, will not be sequestered, meaning they will remain in the room during trial. Also, the next Rule 410 states that bench conferences and objection argument sidebars ought to remain for obvious reasons in the presence of the jury. However, I would ask Your Honor's preference, when we come to one of those times when we need a sidebar, should we go ahead and ask if we are constructively out of the hearing of the jury, or just go ahead and assume that?
Just go on and assume that.
All right.
Yeah.
Otherwise, we are ready for trial.
Okay. Any pretrial matters over here?
None, Your Honor, as long as the same ones that counsel asked for apply to us as well.
Reciprocity. You
Thank
get all
you, Your
you get
Honor.
all the same things.
Thank you.
All right, that sounds great. All right, so we're all ready for trial. Let's swear in the witnesses as a group. Let's just do it all together at one time. If all the witnesses will stand. All right, if you'll raise your right hand. You swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God.
I do.
All right, you are all sworn in. All right. Let's see. All right, we're going to, at this point, go on and do our opening statements, unless there's any other matters. Okay.
May I proceed, Your Honor?
You may.
Mark my words, the theater will go up in smoke. If I can't have the Georgia Theater, no one can have the Georgia Theater. These threatening words were yelled at a judge in open court by Miss Billy Sherman after a judge had put Hayden Beauregard in control of the business the two had owned together. On November 12, 2014, Miss Sherman made good on her threat and set fire to the historic Georgia Theater. And now she blames her best friend and business partner, Hayden Beauregard, so she can collect the $15 million of insurance proceeds. May it please the court. Counsel, members of the jury, my name is Dominic Mendelik, and together with my co-counsel, we have the honor of representing Hayden Beauregard in this important matter. The insurance company has already paid the $15 million into court. All parties agree this fire was intentionally set by either Mr. Beauregard or Miss Sherman. Your job here today is to determine who set this fire and award the entire $15 million to the other party, since the law forbids an arsonist from receiving any insurance proceeds. We must prove, by preponderance of the evidence, that Billy Sherman set this fire. And members of the jury, we will more than meet our burden here today. The evidence will show that Hayden Beauregard grew up right here in Athens and always loved the local music scene. We will call Mr. Beauregard to the stand. He will tell you that he was childhood friends with Billy Sherman, and it was always their dream to buy the old Elite Theater together and return it to part of Athens' live music scene. The theater had a dark history, however. In the 1920s, the owners got into a dispute, and one owner shot the other and then hung himself with a rope from the theater office ceiling. When they were children, Miss Sherman used to scare Hayden about this history, and she tried to scare him again on the night of the fire. The two bought the old Elite Theater, renovated it, and in 2012 reopened it as the Georgia Theater. Billy was in charge of the money. They brought in local and national acts, but for some reason, they weren't making any money. Over time, Hayden began to realize that Billy was embezzling money from the company. Hayden built up an entire file on Billy's embezzlement activities. We'd like to be able to show you that entire file, but the evidence will show that Miss Sherman took that file and used it to set the Georgia Theater on fire. We will also call Nolan Clark to the stand. Mr. Clark is the theater's bookkeeper and Billy's roommate for many years. Mr. Clark will tell you that though he was the theater's bookkeeper, Billy would take the money after every concert into her private office and count that money alone before giving Mr. Clark an opportunity to double-check Billy's math. but the evidence will show that Ms. Sherman was embezzling from the theater. After he found out about her embezzlement, Mr. Beauregard filed a lawsuit, and at an initial hearing, a judge gave temporary control of the theater over to Mr. Beauregard and ordered Ms. Sherman to stay away. Members of the jury, it was then that Ms. Sherman became enraged, yelled that the judge was running a kangaroo court, threatened to burn down the theater, yelled that if she couldn't have the theater, no one could, and told everyone there in court that day the theater would go up in smoke. The evidence will show that on the night before the fire, Ms. Sherman took her roommate, Nolan Clark's car, drove back to the theater, went down to her former office in the theater basement, hung a rope in the shape of a noose from the ceiling, took the embezzlement file onto the stage, lit the papers on fire, and returned home. We will also call expert Elijah Johnston to the stand. Mr. Johnston will testify how there were papers found littered all over the stage, which led him to conclude that's how the fire was started. He will also describe to you how the physical evidence from the scene is consistent with his conclusions. The incriminating embezzlement file used to start the fire, the court taking away control of the business from Ms. Sherman, and Ms. Sherman's threats made an open court to burn the theater to the ground. At the conclusion of today's trial, the evidence will show that Ms. Sherman set this fire, and my co-counsel will ask you to return a verdict in favor of our client, Mr. Hayden Beauregard. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, counsel. You're from the other side.
Yes, Your Honor. Members of the jury, I want you to think about what Mr. Mendlick just told you. Ms. Sherman just up and decided to go break into a theater and burn it down all for the sake of some joke. And this joke was all over anger over a partnership she had just agreed to settle. And even more than that, when Ms. Sherman broke into that theater, she left all this incriminating evidence that would point the finger directly to her. If when you heard that you thought it sounded a little too ridiculous to be true, it is because that is exactly what it is. Now, opposing counsel did get one thing right. Someone started that fire. And that someone is here in this courtroom today. But what he didn't tell you is that only one of the two defendants was desperate. Only one of the two defendants in today's trial had taken out a second mortgage on his family home and was running out of money. He was facing foreclosure. He didn't tell you that only one defendant in today's case was running out of time, running out of money, and running out of options. Now, I don't have to tell you that that person was Mr. Hayden Beauregard, because that is exactly what the evidence in today's trial is going to show. Now, when Mr. Mendlick just gave you his opening statement, he told you a story. And I want to tell you the rest of that story. When Hayden Beauregard and Ms. Billy Sherman started working together, it was Mr. Beauregard's responsibility to finance the theater. So, he took out a second mortgage on his family home to get the business up and running. But it didn't take long for the two partners to realize that the business just wasn't going to be successful. But Mr. Beauregard would not take this for an answer. Instead, he accused Ms. Sherman of embezzlement and had her removed from the business. But guess what? Only a few months after Ms. Sherman was removed from the business, the theater was continuing to lose money. Except now, Mr. Beauregard was running out of time. He was receiving mail that was telling him he was facing foreclosure. He was facing bankruptcy. So he contacts Ms. Sherman and begs her to agree to sell the theater and split the proceeds 50-50. He was running out of money. But when she refused, he realized something. He realized, I don't need her to get all that money back. Because he remembered that he had taken out a $1 million policy on that building. And it was at this time, when he was the most desperate, when he was running out of time, and when he was running out of money, that he turned to his final option. and he raised that insurance policy to $15 million. Only 2 months later, that building burned to the ground. And here you are today. You're here to decide which one of these two people gets that insurance money. And when you think about that, I not only want you to think about who would have burned down the Georgia Theater, but also who could have done it. Today you will learn that when Ms. Sherman was accused of embezzlement, she was forced to hand over her keys to the judge. Mr. Beauregard was the only remaining person with a set of keys to that theater. Not only did he have sole access to the Georgia Theater, but he also had sole access to the specific source of the fire. Today, you will hear from an expert fire investigator, and he will tell you that the only scientifically plausible way that that fire could have been started was by light bulbs in the footlight, igniting an accelerant. You will hear from a maintenance manager as well today, and he will tell you that the light switch to those footlights was locked. Do you want to guess who had the key to that lock? It was the man who was out of time, who was out of money, and who was well out of options. Miss Sherman did not burn down the Georgia Theater. This man did. For that reason, we ask that you find in favor of Billy Sherman. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, counsel. All right. This time, unless there's any other matters, we'll call the first witness.
Your Honor, we call Hayden Beauregard to the stand.
Okay. You've already been sworn in. So.
Please introduce yourself to the jury.
Hi, my name is Hayden Beauregard, and I live right here in Athens.
Tell the jury a little bit more about yourself.
Well, I've loved music and the Athens music scene for basically my entire life. When I was a little kid, I was always listening to the radio, and when I got older, I was constantly going to concerts or music shows at clubs.
Do you know the other defendant in this case, Miss Hayden, Miss Billy Sherman?
Yeah, I know Billy. We were close friends in grade school and in high school, and we even owned the Georgia Theater together for some time several years ago. But unfortunately, the relationship soured after I found out about some of her business practices.
Did you and Miss Sherman ever explore the Georgia Theater together?
Yeah. Back in those days, it was known as the Elite Theater, but it was closed and abandoned. Me and Billy used to go around at night and sneak in the theater. It was dark, and Billy would always scare me based on the crazy history of the theater.
What was that crazy history?
Well, back in the 1920s, the theater was owned by two partners who got into a dispute. One was found shot dead, with some burnt papers scattered around, and the other was also found dead in the theater. He was in the office, and he was hanging from a rope around his neck.
How did you and Miss Sherman come to purchase and renovate the Georgia Theater?
Well, it had been a dream of mine for a while at that point. We bought the old theater, renovated it into a live music venue, and then reopened it in 2012 as partners.
Let the record reflect that I'm handing opposing counsel a copy of Exhibit 2. Your Honor, may I approach the witness?
You may.
Mr. Beauregard, I'm handing you Exhibit 2. What is Exhibit 2?
This is the floor layout of the Georgia Theater after the renovation.
Your Honor, we offer Exhibit 2 into evidence. Its authenticity has previously been stipulated.
Counsel, any objection?
I don't have any objections to this.
Okay, it's admitted.
Mr. Beauregard, we'll discuss that floor layout later in the trial. But for now, could you tell the jury about your financial arrangement with Ms. Sherman?
Sure. I trusted Billy, so we never had any written agreements. But Billy had her MBA, so she handled all the money.
Did you ever take out any insurance on the theater?
Yes. Initially, we took out $1 million, which I thought was a little low, but Billy said it was all we could afford at the time. Then later, when I had the business appraised, I was advised to increase it. So I did. I increased it to $15 million, which was more in line with the total replacement cost of all the historic equipment we used in that building. Also at the time, Billy had been doing some things that, frankly, they made me worried for the safety of the business.
After construction was complete in 2012, how did the theater do?
Well, we did great at first. We were enormously popular, but for some reason, we never seemed to be making any money. And then after a while, I started to suspect that Billy had been embezzling from the company.
Objection, Your Honor. This is unfairly prejudicial under Rule 403.
Counsel?
Your Honor, this is highly relevant. The evidence and suspicion of this witnesses of Ms. Sherman embezzling goes towards the court hearing that this jury will hear about later. That court hearing is where Ms. Sherman gave violent threats against the Georgia Theater, violent threats that she acted on November 12th, 2014, when she burned down the Georgia Theater.
May I respond, Your Honor?
You may.
Your Honor, though this evidence may be relevant, regardless, any probative value is highly outweighed by the danger of unfair prejudice due to the fact that when the jury hears that he has been embezzling, they will only think of him as a bad person and not be willing to consider this on a purely factual basis.
Counsel, anything further?
Your Honor, this goes directly towards Mr. Beauregard's suspicions of embezzling, which are highly relevant and not at all prejudicial.
Okay, I'm going to allow it in, but I'm also going to give you have a lot of free reign on cross-examination, so I'm going to let you take care of that on that.
Yes, Your
Okay?
Honor.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you, Your Honor. Do you need me to repeat the question, Mr. Beauregard?
I think I was pretty much finished with my answer.
So what caused those suspicions?
Well, in April 2013, we had one of the rare full house concerts. The next morning, I found not one, but two bank deposit slips on Billy's desk.
Could you tell the jury a little bit more about those slips you found?
Well, I saw one and I knew it was made into the theater's bank account. But the other one, I didn't recognize that account.
Mr. Beauregard, did you ever act on those suspicions?
I did. I started making a file of all the things Billy said and did, and eventually I took her to court. So, unfortunately, we ended up in court over the ending of our partnership.
What happened during the litigation phase of that lawsuit?
Well, early on, there was a trial to determine who would run the business until the litigation had been over. Instead of appointing a receiver, the judge ordered that I should be the one to run the business. Billy was still a partner, but she had no say in the day-to-day operations.
Were both you and Ms. Sherman present at this court hearing?
Oh yeah, we were.
Mr. Beauregard, how did Ms. Sherman react when the judge excluded her from running the business?
Not well. She yelled at the judge, accused him of running a kangaroo court, and then she said, if I ever got control of the theater, that the theater would go up in smoke.
What happened after she said, if you were left in charge of the theater would go up in smoke?
After that, she yelled, if I can't have the Georgia Theater, nobody can.
Mr. Beauregard, while you were running the day-to-day operations of the business, how did it do?
Not well. We continued to lose money and the business was dying.
Did that have any impact on your personal financial situation?
It did. Early on in the business, I had taken out a second mortgage to finance the renovations. Unfortunately, because the business was doing so poorly, I couldn't make any payments on this. And the bank eventually foreclosed and ultimately bought my family home.
Did you ever reach a settlement in that lawsuit?
Well, I kept making... Excuse me, could you repeat the question?
Did you ever reach a settlement in that lawsuit, Mr. Beauregard?
I'm sorry, I just got lost. Which lawsuit?
The lawsuit at the court hearing that was going on about Ms. Sherman embezzling. Did you ever schedule a day to sign a settlement?
Yes, we did. We scheduled the date for November 12th. I kept making an offer to Billy that, we sell the theater, pay off our debts, and split everything 50-50. So I could pay off my debts and I could finally be done with all this business. Billy kept rejecting the offer again and again and again and again. And then randomly one day she just accepted it. And like I said earlier, we set the date for November 12th, but unfortunately nothing got signed that day, as that was the day the Georgia Theater burned out.
Let's talk about that day. And I know this might be hard for you, but tell the jury what exactly happened.
Well, early in the morning, I woke up to the sound of sirens, and I saw smoke coming from the direction of the Georgia Theater out my window. So I threw on my clothes as fast as I could, and I ran down to the theater, but when I got there, there was nothing we could do.
Mr. Beauregard, what did you do when you saw your theater burning?
Well, my first thought was I had to save anything that I could, so I ran inside, and when I got downstairs, I noticed that the file that I had been keeping on Billy's embezzlement, it was gone.
Did you notice anything else?
Yeah. After I noticed that the file was missing, I noticed something else. There was a rope hanging from the ceiling in the shape of a noose. Just like the old stories that Billy used to scare me about when we were little kids.
Did you ever find that embezzlement file after the fire?
Not all of it. A couple pages were found one floor up after everything had burned. But those pages were just barely intact.
No further questions, Your Honor.
Okay. Thank you, counsel. And cross-examination.
Yes, Your Honor. Mr. Beauregard, when you and Mr. Sherman began the Georgia Theater project, one of your primary roles was to provide the financing, wasn't it?
Yes. Initially, I took out the second mortgage on my family home so that we could start the renovations and we'd have enough money.
And in doing so, you extended your personal finances to the hilt.
Well, at that time, no, but eventually, as the theater was slowly dying, it did extend my personal finances to the hilt.
Now, just so this jury can understand, what the second mortgage meant for you is that you took out a cash loan and put up your family home as collateral, correct?
Yes, exactly.
Which would mean that if you didn't pay back the loan, then your family home would go into foreclosure.
Yes.
Meaning that your family would be evicted.
Yes.
So, Mr. Beauregard, you depended upon the Georgia Theater to make money, didn't you?
Well, I also had my other businesses.
But you especially depended upon the Georgia Theater.
Well, I used both the Georgia Theater and my other businesses.
But eventually the Georgia Theater started losing money, didn't it?
Exactly. The Georgia Theater started losing money, and I had default on those payments.
And when it started losing money, you blamed the losses on Billy Sherman, did you not?
Exactly. After we had started losing enough money, and I just couldn't see another reason why, other than maybe something awful was going on.
And your primary evidence for this embezzlement was 2 deposit slips.
Yeah, that's where it started.
And so you took her to court.
Exactly.
You regained control of the theater.
Well, yes.
It was only in your control.
Well, yes. I had control of the day-to-day operations, but Billy was still a silent partner. So when I wanted to get some loans signed off so we could actually start making money in the theater, and she didn't sign them, well, that's what happened.
Which meant that Billy Sherman no longer had any hand on the finances of the theater. Correct?
Well, exactly. Billy didn't have her hand in the specifically, she couldn't take any money anymore, but since the business had already been doing so poorly and we didn't have the money to make the changes that I wanted to make, well, yeah, the theater kept losing money.
And in this hearing, Billy Sherman was ordered to give her keys to the judge.
Yes, she was.
And she did so.
Yes, I saw her give a set of keys.
You watched as she physically gave her keys to the Georgia Theater to the judge.
Well, I watched her give a set of keys.
Now, after this hearing, in which Hayden Beauregard, you, sir, were given full control of the theater, Billy Sherman no longer had a role.
Your Honor, do you mind if I reposition myself so I have a view of the witness?
That'd be fine.
In which you were given full control of the theater still was losing money, was it not?
I'm sorry I didn't hear the start of the question.
After the hearing in which Billy Sherman was taken out of the business, the theater was still losing money.
Exactly, because she refused to sign the loans.
But you can no longer blame it on any embezzlement, could you?
Well, she wasn't embezzling anymore, but the reason the business had started to fail was because of the embezzlement.
During this time, you started getting default notices from the bank, didn't you?
Exactly. I started getting default notices, and eventually that led to the foreclosure on my family home, and eventually they bought my family home.
Thank you, sir. Now, what these notices were telling you was that you were running out of time on paying back these loans, weren't you?
Exactly.
It meant that you were running out of money.
Well, yes, I had been running out of money for a while at that point.
Now, let's talk about what options you might have had in front of you. The theater was insured.
Yes, the theater was insured, but that wasn't an option.
Well, it was originally insured for $1 million, was it not?
Yes, originally it was insured for $1 million, and then we increased it to $15 million.
And you increased it to $15 million 2 months before the fire.
Well, exactly. I increased it to $15 million because that's what the building was worth. I mean, an insurance company isn't gonna just give out more insurance than a building is worth. They're never gonna overinsure a building.
Sir, you are aware that the total value of the loss of the fire was appraised at $3 million?
Well, that was just the appraised value, but not the replacement cost that I had asked for.
So, sir, are you telling us that all of the historic equipment, like you said on direct examination, would be worth $12 million?
Well, to replace all that historic equipment, it would be quite a lot of money. I mean, you can't just buy this stuff on Craigslist.
Well, when you took out this $15 million insurance policy, it was only effective for 3 months. True?
Yes, exactly.
And when you took out this insurance policy, in your own words, it was at a moment when you said the theater would be worth more dead than alive.
Exactly. I just wanted to settle and be done with the theater so I can move on.
Now, Mr. Beauregard, I want to make sure this jury understands what's at stake for you today. If you lose this lawsuit, you have to file bankruptcy.
Exactly. And I wouldn't have to do that if this fire had never occurred and if we had just settled on that day. But because of the fire, yes.
And sir, if you lose this lawsuit, you won't be able to pay your expert, will you, Elijah Johnston?
Exactly.
Because you offered him a contingency fee.
Well, he's not getting a percentage of the earnings. It's just, if I don't win, I'm broke. I can't pay him.
But if you do win, you will be able to pay him.
Yep.
And if you don't, you lose everything.
Exactly.
No further questions.
Okay, thank you, counsel. You redirect.
Yes, Your Honor.
Interesting.
Do you recall questions and cross-examination about your raising of the insurance policy?
Yes, I do.
Could you explain to the jury why exactly you raised that policy?
Well, I mean, to start off, I was advised to increase it. In addition, Billy had been doing some things that had frankly made me nervous. And, you know, the $15 million, that was reasonable. I mean, that wasn't some random number that I just pulled out of my head. It's what the insurance company said they would cover.
Did you have a settlement plan in place during that 3-month period where the insurance was covered for?
Did we have excuse me?
Did you have a settlement plan in place during that 3 months the insurance was increased for?
A settlement plan with Billy?
A settlement plan with Billy?
Yes, we did.
And you mentioned this replacement cost and the cost of the theater as appraisal. Why is that a different figure between the replacement cost and the appraisal value?
Well, the appraised value is just what the theater is worth, you know, right now. Let's say you have a 10-year-old car, and today it gets totaled. The car insurance company isn't going to pay you what it costs to get a new car. They're going to pay you for what it's worth. Instead, in this case, I asked for a replacement cost, which was more in line with everything we needed to restore the historic theater to its former glory.
No further questions, Your Honor.
All right, anything further for this witness?
I have no recross, Your Honor.
All right, you may be excused. All right, y'all can call your next witness.
Your Honor, we call Nolan Clark to the stand.
Mr. Clark, you've already been sworn in, so.
Please introduce yourself to the jury.
Hi, my name is Nolan Clark. I was born and raised here in Athens.
Describe your educational background.
Well, growing up, I was always a fan of UGA, so it's no surprise I came here and I got my accounting degree.
Do you know Mr. Hayden Beauregard?
I do. I worked for Hayden part-time while I was an undergrad. I did business accounting work for him, and I still work for him today.
Do you know Billy Sherman?
I also know Billy. We were roommates in college. People, they used to think we were dating, but it was never like that. We were just friends. I worked for both Billy and Hayden at the Georgia Theater.
Please tell the jury what you did as an employee of the Georgia Theater.
Well, I was hired to handle all the finances, including counting all the money and preparing monthly and yearly budget reports for both Billy and Hayden.
Did you have any problems fulfilling any of your job responsibilities?
Well, actually, I did. The box office, they could have just handed me the money directly, but Billy, she went and took the money for herself.
What did Miss Sherman do with the money once she took it?
Well, she would take it back to her office, and she would count it in private, while no one else was there. And then, sometime later, she'd hand me the cash so I could double check her math.
As between Hayden Beauregard and Billy Sherman, who handled the finances for the business?
Hayden didn't do any of that. He trusted Billy with all the money, at least at first.
Did there come a time when that changed?
Yes, the theater began to lose money, and then that's when Hayden showed me the 2 bank deposit receipts.
What do you recall about those 2 deposits?
Well, I remember that one deposit was made into the theater's account, but that other deposit, it was made into an unknown account.
Do you recall the show that took place the evening before these deposits were made?
I do. I remember because it was one of our larger shows.
Based on your experience handling the finance for the theater, did approximately $9,000 that was deposited into the theater's bank account seem high or low for one of your bigger shows?
That number is certainly low for one of our larger
Objection,
shows.
Your Honor. The question that opposing counsel just asked contained information that has not been admitted into evidence and is contained in the exhibit, specifically referring to the $9,000.
Counsel.
Your Honor, there's no evidence rule that forces us to put an exhibit into evidence. I believe counsel is referring to the best evidence rule, which has been excluded from the mock trial packet rules.
Your Honor, if I may, the evidence that he's referring to is hearsay, which is what my objection would go to if that is the case.
Counsel.
We're not offering the statement that it's $9,000 for the truth of the matter asserted, but rather for the effect on the listeners. In this case, Mr. Clark and Mr. Beauregard. And they discussed these 2 deposits, and that was the basis for Mr. Beauregard's suspicions that led to the embezzlement trial.
Your Honor, if I may, if they're not being offered the truth of the matter asserted, then they are in no way relevant to today's case. As if they are not true, then you cannot prove through them that there was embezzlement and that there was fraud, and therefore they cannot be entered.
Okay, I'm going to overrule your objection, but I'm going to let you deal with it on cross.
Yes, Your Honor.
Go ahead, counsel.
What did you observe about the personal relationship between Hayden Beauregard and Billy Sherman at that point?
Well, it went from bad to worse. I even had to go to a court hearing and testify. Hayden talked about it earlier.
Did you hear Ms. Sherman make any statements in open court that day?
I did.
What did she say?
She said, if I can't have the theater, nobody can have her.
Let's turn to the time between the court hearing and the fire. Did you hear Ms. Sherman make any statements about the theater in that time period?
Well, I did.
What did Ms. Sherman say?
Well, she was really focused with the theater being hers. She wanted it just for herself, and she would often tell me, if I can't have the theater, nobody can have it. She said this to me more than once.
As the theater continued to struggle, what did you observe about how Mr. Beauregard was handling the business losses?
Well, he was stressed. He had taken out a second mortgage on his home, but the losses kept mounting. He once told me that the theater felt like an albatross around his neck. Who could blame him?
Did you make any recommendations to Mr. Beauregard about the insurance policy?
Well, actually, I did. I recommend that he increase the insurance on the property. I thought it was underinsured.
Now let's turn to the night of November 11th, 2014, the night before the fire. Please explain to the jury what you did that evening.
Well, I was working late with Hayden. I left work around 9:30, and I went home and got dressed to play some poker with some friends. I saw that Billy was home, but then my car wouldn't start. So I rolled it out onto the street, and I left it there.
What did you do with your car keys?
We have a really narrow driveway, so I always leave my car keys under the driver's side floor mat, in case Billy has to move it.
Other than your car keys, were there any other keys on your keychain when you pulled away and Billy was still at the house?
The keys to the theater.
After you left your car keys and the keys to the theater under your floor mat, what did you do next?
Well, I went to go play poker, and I didn't get home until around 6:30 the next morning. When I got home, I saw the door was almost shut in Billy's room, the TV was on, and it was really dark. And that's when we heard the sirens.
What happened then?
Well, I got in my car, but it started right up this time, which I thought was strange. But I headed to the theater as fast as I could. Hayden was there, but there was nothing we could do.
Did you hear Mr. Beauregard testify that he ran into the theater while it was on fire and saw a rope hanging from the office ceiling?
I was.
Had you seen a rope in the days leading up to the fire?
I had. Just a couple of days before the fire, Billy and I bought some rope for our garden. So when Hayden told me these things, I went and I looked inside my trunk.
What did you see?
Well, where we had put the rope in my car, it was no longer there. There was nothing. The rope was gone.
Then what happened?
Well, I went home and told Billy what had happened.
How did Miss Sherman react when you told her that her theater had just burned to the ground?
Well, she had this distant look on her face. You know, like she wasn't even there. And then she said to me, things like this happen for a reason. Besides, they increased the insurance on the property, didn't they?
No further questions, Your Honor.
Okay, counsel?
Yes, Your Honor. Mr. Clark, you're very familiar with Ms. Sherman and Mr. Beauregard, is that right?
I am.
You've worked for them both, haven't you?
I have.
You've worked for Mr. Beauregard at the Georgia Theater?
Correct, with Billy.
You've worked with Mrs. Sherman at the Georgia Theater, isn't that right?
Exactly.
Now, at the Georgia Theater, part of your job, or your whole job, was to be the bookkeeper, isn't that right?
Exactly. When I was able to count the money, I handled all the finances.
Well, you did more than just count money. You did a payroll, right?
Exactly.
You did accounts receivable and payable.
True.
You did monthly budget reports.
I did it all.
And yearly budget reports, right?
That's true.
And I'm sure you did a lot more things when it comes to money with that, right?
Right. I was heavily involved in the finances of the theater.
And you were heavily involved in the finances of the theater so that you could stay aware of the theater's financial health. Isn't that correct?
Again, only when I was allowed to count the money.
Well, that was your job. You were supposed to monitor the theater's financial health. Isn't that right?
Exactly.
And when you would do this, you realized that early on the theater was making money, wasn't it?
Well, it was. It was bringing in large crowds, and we were turning a profit almost every night.
For the first 8 months, right?
I think it was about that long, yes.
And then the theater started to lose money. Is that correct?
It did.
And when the theater started to lose money, that's when Mr. Beauregard accused Miss Sherman of embezzling money. Is that right?
That's true. He saw those two bank deposit receipts, and it was unmistakably Billy.
I want to talk about those deposit receipts for a minute. That was all the evidence that he came to you with, isn't that right?
Well, that, and we were losing money at such a drastic rate.
Now, you talked a little bit about a deposit receipt that had $9,000 on it, right?
Yes, that was into the theater's account.
And you said that it was a little low for that night, wasn't it?
Well, it was.
Now, was that the same night that your bouncer didn't show up and so a bunch of kids got in? Is that correct?
I have no idea what you're referring to.
You have no idea?
No idea.
Now, when you counted that and he told you that that was a little low, you looked at this other $5,000 deposit and assumed that that came from the theater. Isn't that right?
I'm very confused because I'm not sure who they is, and I'm not sure where you got this other $5,000.
The second deposit receipt he showed you.
I don't remember the amount, no.
Oh, so you don't remember the second piece of incriminating evidence that he brought against Miss Sherman?
I was never allowed to see those files.
Okay, you weren't allowed to see those files?
No.
And so then you based your entire opinion of Miss Sherman, you based your entire idea that she was embezzling on one file. Is that what you're telling us?
I didn't. That was Hayden.
So Mr. Beauregard based his entire idea of her embezzling on one file. Is that what you're telling the court today?
Absolutely not. I didn't have control of those files. That was Hayden, so obviously he had both.
So Mr. Beauregard's the only one who's ever seen those files. Is that what you're telling us?
I'm not exactly sure.
Okay, so when he accused Miss Sherman of embezzling, he had her removed from the business, didn't he?
Well, Judge did, yes.
And when he had her removed from the business, you talked about how she gave over her keys to that theater. Isn't that right?
She gave over a set of keys, yes.
And even after he had her removed from the business, isn't it true that it continued to lose money?
It did. You know, Billy was bad-mouthing the business. She wouldn't co-sign off on loans. We were losing more money than ever.
Well, and it was losing money so bad that he started to, or Mr. Beauregard started to testify that it was like an albatross hanging around his neck, isn't that right?
He said that to me once, yes.
It was stressing him out, wasn't it?
Of course.
Now let's look at the reason it stressed him out. He was also running out of time to pay back his loans, isn't that correct?
Well, I didn't know too much about his personal finances. I just did the theater's account.
He came to you with letters, didn't he?
I believe so, yes.
Came to you with letters of foreclosure, isn't that right?
That's true.
Saying that his home was about to be foreclosed on, isn't that correct?
I believe we had a pile for it, yes.
So he was running out of time to pay back that foreclosure, wasn't he?
I believe so. I'm not exactly sure.
More than that, you're aware that he was facing bankruptcy, isn't that right?
I didn't know that.
Did you hear him testify in court today?
That was the first time I've heard of it, yes.
And so you would agree with me during this time he was under a lot of stress, wasn't he?
Well, of course. Like I said earlier, it felt like an albatross around his neck.
You agree with me, if the Georgia Theater started making money, it would kind of relieve some of that stress, wouldn't it?
That would have been great. I think Hayden tried that. He tried splitting the profits 50-50, but it never fell through.
Because he was running out of money, wasn't he?
Well, exactly. With Billy bad-mouthing the business, not co-signing off on loans, bands canceling, we couldn't do anything.
Now, when he was running out of money, this is when you, an accountant, recommended that he raise the insurance policy on this building. Is that right?
Right. Billy was bad-mouthing the business, and we were starting to get suspicious. I advised him to raise it from $3 million to $15 million.
And he took that advice, didn't he?
Yes, and obviously it paid off.
Oh, it paid off, isn't that right?
Well, right.
We're here in court today looking to see if we're going to award him $15 million. Is that right?
We never wanted the $15 million. Sorry, he didn't. We just wanted to split it 50-50.
Now, he raised this insurance policy when he was desperate, right? You just testified he was running out of money, wasn't he?
Right, I wouldn't testify that he's desperate.
Well, he was about to face foreclosure, right?
That's true.
You heard him say he was about to face bankruptcy, right?
That's true.
And just 2 months after he raised that insurance policy, the theater burned down, didn't it?
It did.
Now, I want to talk a little bit about the day of that fire. The night before, you talked about you went home from work late, isn't that right?
That is true.
Mr. Beauregard was at work when you left, wasn't he?
I believe so, yes.
He was downstairs in the office working late too, wasn't he?
He was working a lot of late nights.
And when he left, he was the only person that you saw in that theater that evening, wasn't he?
That I know of, yes.
You didn't see anybody else. You only saw him.
Right. And our office is connected to the street, so that makes sense.
And to your knowledge, he was the only person in that theater since you didn't see anyone else, right?
I couldn't be exactly sure about that.
But you are aware that only a few hours later, that theater was on fire. Isn't that correct?
Well, it wasn't a few hours later. I left work at 9:30. It was the entire next day.
Early the next morning, wasn't it?
Exactly the next day.
Firefighters arrived at 6 a.m., didn't they?
I don't know about that.
And you are aware that you were the last person to ever see Mr. Beauregard that night. Isn't that correct?
I don't know if that's true.
No further questions, Your Honor.
Okay, counsel?
No redirect, Your Honor.
All right, you may be excused. Call your next witness.
Your Honor, we call Elijah Johnston to the stand. Let the record reflect I'm handing a copy of Exhibit 8 to opposing counsel.
Okay.
Thank you.
Your Honor, before I begin, I'd like to offer Exhibit 8 into evidence. Its authenticity and admissibility without further foundation have already been stipulated to.
Oh, you want to show it to opposing counsel?
Well, we've already got a copy.
Okay, you got a
and there is
copy?
no objection.
No objection. All right, it's submitted.
May I approach the witness?
You may.
Please introduce yourself to the jury.
Hello, my name is Elijah Johnston. I'm the president and CEO of ICU Investigations.
Tell the jury a little about yourself.
Well, I graduated from the University of Georgia with a degree in criminal justice. I served with the Athens-Clarke County Police Department. For part of my time there, I was the person responsible for investigating fires.
Do you have any specialized training in the field of fire investigations?
I do. I've received training in arson investigation, surveillance, and general crime scene investigation. I've taken State of Georgia firefighter training course. I've taken classes in evidence recovery, fire fatalities, and fire pattern recognition. I've also taken and passed the written exam to become a certified fire investigator.
Do you know either Hayden Beauregard or Miss Billy Sherman?
Yes, I've known both of them since I was in middle school.
Tell the jury about the scope of your investigation into the cause and spread of this fire.
Well, in my official capacity, I investigated the scene of the fire within an hour after it was reported. I interviewed witnesses, including both Hayden Beauregard and Billy Sherman, and I reviewed the ATF report, including witness statements, building particulars, and evidence collected at the scene.
Your Honor, we tender Mr. Johnston as an expert in the field of fire investigations.
Counsel?
There is no objection.
Okay. You deemed an expert.
Yes, Your Honor. Mr. Johnston, let's fast forward to November 12th, 2014. When did you first learn of the fire that morning?
Well, it was early that morning after the initial call for the fire was received. I immediately proceeded to the scene.
What did you observe at the scene?
Well, it was too late to save the building. The roof had collapsed onto the floor and stage below, and the rear of the stage on the western side of the theater had collapsed into the basement. The building burned and smoldered for the next few hours, but eventually the fire was extinguished and the remaining structure declared safe for entry.
Did you enter what remained of the Georgia Theater that morning?
I did, along with the ATF investigator.
Do you still have Exhibit 2 in front of you?
Yes, that's right.
Mr. Johnston, would it be helpful for your testimony to step down from the stand with a copy of Exhibit 2 to better describe your investigation for our jury?
Yes, it would.
Your Honor, at this time, may this witness step down from the stand for the next portion of his
Unless
testimony.
there's any objection.
There's no objection. Could I move to see this
You may.
presentation? Yes.
Please bring Exhibit 2A. Mr. Johnston, could you please first describe the general layout of the theater?
Sure. So to orient everyone, north is at the top of the page here. I know this is going to be a little hard for you to see, but the main doors are on the east side of the theater here. Then you have the lobby, followed by the sound and light board. Here's the main floor area, which had a gentle slope downwards towards the rear of the stage at the back or westernmost side of the theater.
What did your investigation reveal regarding the cause and spread of this fire?
So the stage here though burned, was largely intact. It was unfortunately made of old pine wood and had recently been repainted with polyurethane. Importantly, the stage was littered with burned documents, which is common when paper is piled up and ignited.
Why were these papers significant to you, Mr. Johnston?
Well, most of the paper we found was destroyed, but we were able to identify just a few documents, which included the bank deposit slips Beauregard discussed earlier.
Was there any other evidence that you found pertinent to your investigation?
Yes, there was. There were theater curtains on the north, south, and western sides of the stage here. Also, an ATF-trained dog was able to locate an accelerant, paint thinner in this case, in two specific locations on the stage. One right here at the front of the stage, and another towards the center.
Thank you, Mr. Johnston. You may retake the stand. Mr. Johnston, based on all your education, training, and experience, your review of the ATF report, your review of the scene, your interview of witnesses, and the remainder of your investigation, do you have an opinion, to a reasonable degree of scientific certainty, as to what caused this fire?
I do.
What is that opinion?
I believe the fire was intentionally set utilizing a pile of paper ignited on the stage. This then spread to the stage itself. Old pine and recently reapplied polyurethane would burn very hot and spread very fast to all parts of the stage. This then ignited the curtains, which ultimately reached up to the rafters, ultimately causing the entire roof to collapse.
What is the basis for your opinion that this fire was started by someone igniting the papers on the stage?
Well, the significant amount of paper found on the stage is very meaningful. It's the clear and obvious source of ignition for this fire.
I'd like to turn to the opinions of the opposing expert, Mr. E.J. Spangler. Are you familiar with Mr. Spangler's conclusions in this case?
I am.
Do you agree with Mr. Spangler's conclusions?
Absolutely not. This theory just isn't possible.
What is your understanding of Mr. Spangler's theory?
Well, as I understand it, Mr. Spangler's theory is that someone could have injected paint thinner in some old light bulbs near the front of the stage. Then when these light bulbs were turned on, they would heat up and ignite the paint thinner inside on fire. Then this paint thinner would explode out of the light bulbs onto the stage, ultimately burning the entire theater to the ground.
Why do you disagree with Mr. Spangler's theory?
It's completely implausible. There are much easier, more reliable ways to start a fire if someone was so inclined.
Did Mr. Spangler's conclusions align with the physical evidence found at the scene?
No, they did not. Firstly, his theory did not take into account the paper evidence which was found on the stage. Secondly, his conclusions did not line up with the accelerant patterns found on the stage.
How so?
Well, as I stated earlier, there were two specific spots where accelerant was found on the stage. One at the front of the stage and another towards the center of the stage. This doesn't line up with his theory on the mechanism of fire ignition.
What do you mean when you say that it doesn't line up with his own theory on the mechanism of the ignition?
Well, if liquid paint thinner inside of some light bulbs was to explode out onto the stage, there would be paint thinner everywhere, and accelerant found in multiple locations. Mr. Spangler's position is that this flying paint thinner on fire was in a nice ball and landed specifically in two locations. There's just no way that happened.
No further questions, Your Honor.
Okay, thank you. Cross?
Yes. Mr. Johnston, I want to make one thing very clear for this jury. As of November 12th, 2014, when this fire started and your investigation started, you were not a certified fire investigator, were you?
Well, yes, at the time of the fire.
You were not? Is that a no to my question, or yes? You were not a certified fire investigator?
Well, yes, I was not a certified fire investigator at the time of the fire.
And to this day, 4.5 years later, you are still not a certified fire investigator, are you?
No, I am a certified fire investigator.
Is that your testimony today, that you are in fact a certified fire investigator?
Absolutely.
You prepared a statement today for today's litigation?
Yes, I have.
You were given the opportunity this morning to redact it, to add things, to change anything so that it contained the whole truth?
Yes, I did.
You were under oath when you wrote the statement to say the whole truth?
Yes, I was.
Is it not true that in the statement you say nothing about getting your certification after your investigation?
No, I do say something about it specifically in the affidavit.
In your affidavit, did you supply your excuse me. This is the affidavit. I was getting mixed up with the CV. You said this in the affidavit. Could you please show us, and be reminded we're on a time constraint, where exactly is that in the affidavit?
I'll have to find it real quick.
Mr. Johnson, if you wouldn't mind, I'm going to go ahead and ask my questions. Once you find it, you can tell me. Have you found it already?
I have found it.
Yes, please.
I stayed on line 54. I signed up for the December 2014 Arson Investigator Program with the Georgian Department of Public Safety Training Center. I know that I would have had enough points once I completed that course.
You say anywhere in that affidavit that you completed that course? May I receive that?
No, I don't state specifically that I completed the course, but it was scheduled for later in the year, and I did complete the course.
Okay, now let's get to your investigation. You've been very good friends with Mr. Bogard for quite a while, correct?
Yes, I've known Mr. Beauregard since middle school.
Met in middle school, you moved next door.
Yes.
That was next door to the Contreras house.
Yes.
The same house that Mr. Beauregard foreclosed on shortly before the fire.
Yes.
That he foreclosed on right around the time he raised the insurance policy, the same house.
I believe so.
And you've remained good friends with Mr. Beauregard ever since then.
Yes, we know each other, but I also know Billy Sherman.
When you walked into this investigation, you were already suspecting Miss Sherman of arson, correct?
As I walked into the investigation, no.
You started this investigation the day the fire was put out, November 12th, correct?
Yes, I did.
That morning after the fire was put out, you walked around the building with the ATF agent, you looked around,
Yes.
you gathered what evidence you needed,
Yes, I did.
and that afternoon, you sat down with Mr. Beauregard and discussed what you had found.
Well, yes, I interviewed Mr. Beauregard.
And by that point, you already had it in your mind that it was Miss Sherman who did this.
Yes, after I completed most of my investigation, I was pretty sure it was Miss Sherman who had committed.
It was obvious to you at this point. Your words.
Well, yes.
This was before you'd even had a chance to get to speak to Miss Sherman to get her side of the story.
Well, I interviewed Miss Sherman that day.
This is before, just so we get the timeline right, you came to this conclusion before you were able to speak to Miss Sherman, correct?
I don't exactly remember. It was quite a long time ago.
Okay. Now let's get into the crux of how you're being paid today. You're being paid on a contingency fee, correct?
Yes, contingent on the fact that if Mr. Beauregard does not win this trial, he simply has no money to pay me.
Right. And after your investigation, you started your own investigation firm, ICU, which you mentioned in direct, the same one.
Yes.
For the first 10 months of you operating that business, you had 0 clients.
Yes.
This man was your first client.
Yes.
To this date, 4.5 years later, he was still your biggest client.
Well, yes, a $15 million case is quite a big client.
You consider this an easy fee?
Well, no. I considered the first part of my investigation an easy fee.
Okay. Your first part of your investigation was an easy fee, correct?
Well, yes.
And also, somewhere along the process, this man, who is claiming to get recovery of $15 million, said that he would double your retainer out of lack of sympathy for your lack of clients. Is that not correct?
Well, yes, out of sympathy for my lack of clients.
Do you still have the ATF report up there with you, Exhibit 8?
Yes, it's right here.
Okay, if you would refer to the last page of that, the last page with the, with just the letters, not the pictures. This report was prepared by a certified fire investigator, correct?
Well, yes, the ATF fire investigator, which I was alongside that morning.
Again, at the time of this investigation, you were not a certified fire investigator, were you?
Well, the day of the fire, no, I was not, because my last class was scheduled for the end of that year.
Okay. You are aware that nowhere in that report does it implicate Miss Sherman as being the culprit of this arson. You are aware of that. That's nowhere in that report.
Well, yes, as this report is the origin and cause report, it sadly doesn't come to any conclusion on who or what started the fire.
In fact, it says on the first page, arson, undetermined origin. Is that what it says?
Yes, it doesn't implicate Beauregard or Sherman.
You are aware that Mr. Beauregard was the last person to leave that building the night before?
Yes, I think so.
You are aware that Mr. Beauregard was the only person that we know of who went in that building the morning of the fire?
Well, yes, he ran in to try and find the embezzlement file, but unfortunately, that's what was used to start the fire.
You are aware that Mr. Beauregard increased the insurance policy on this building from $1 million to $15 million on September 2nd before the fire?
Well, yes, I heard that here today.
And you are aware that Mr. Beauregard is the one and only person who saw the noose, saw the pipe, and saw the missing file that morning. You are aware of that?
Well, yes, after he ran in to try and save the embezzlement file.
He was the only person who saw that.
Yes, as the fire had burned up.
Thank you. Nothing further.
Okay, is there anything further for this witness?
Yes, Your Honor, redirect.
Okay.
Mr. Johnston, do you recall questions on cross-examination regarding your involvement in prosecuting Billy Sherman?
Yes, I do.
Why did you so strongly pursue that it was Miss Billy Sherman who set this fire?
Well, there are multiple reasons, including all those that we've heard here today.
Objection to improper opinion.
Counsel?
Your Honor, I believe on cross-examination, opposing counsel brought up points to, in cross-examining this witness on how and why he conducted his investigation and attempted to charge Miss Sherman with arson. I'm merely examining this witness into why he did so, because it's our contention, Your Honor, that Miss Sherman did in fact burn down the Georgia Theater, and this witness is entitled to give his response as to his basis for that opinion. He is an expert, Your Honor.
May I be heard?
Yes.
If I would elaborate on what opposing counsel just said, what I got into in my cross-examination is why Mr. Johnston suspected Ms. Sherman, and that would direct the way of his investigation. That's not coming to an opinion yet that it is Ms. Sherman. It's just that he suspected her and is coming to an opinion based on what his investigation would go to afterwards. An opinion in regards to a fire investigator that would point the finger towards someone is an improper opinion because it gets into the mens rea of whoever caused that fire. That's something an arson investigator can do, not something a fire investigator can do.
Counsel?
Yes, Your Honor. Your Honor, opposing counsel was inquiring into why this witness formulated his opinion on the day after the fire that Ms. Sherman committed this fire. This is merely following up on that testimony. Furthermore, Your Honor, it's completely proper for this witness to testify as to the cause of this fire, as he is a tendered fire investigating expert, Your Honor. In this case, it's the contention of this witness that the fire was caused by Ms. Sherman.
I'm going to allow it. I'm overrule your objection.
Yes, Your Honor.
Go ahead.
Would you like me to re-ask the question, Mr. Johnston?
Sure.
Why did you so strongly pursue that it was Ms. Sherman, out of anybody else, that set the fire at the Georgia Theater?
Well, there are many reasons. It was the embezzlement file that was first used to start the fire on the stage. It was Ms. Sherman's last-minute acceptance of the settlement offer, which was to be signed later that afternoon. It was Ms. Sherman's history of trying to scare Mr. Beauregard with threats and specific items about the history of the theater, including the noose that was found in the basement. All these and many more reasons are why I believe that.
No further questions, Your Honor.
All right. There's nothing further for this witness. You're excused. Okay, I think it's time for you all to... Do you have any preliminary matters before you call your first witness?
There is none.
Okay.
All right, we call Mr. E.J. Spengler.
Okay.
Your Honor, I will say, just to clarify, on the roster, our witnesses are out of order. I think we are calling Spengler, then Bewley, and then Billy Sherman.
Okay, that'll be fine. Thank you for that clarification, counsel. All right. Already been sworn in? Counsel?
Please state your name for the record.
My name is E.J. Spengler.
And Mr. Spengler, what do you do for a living?
I currently work for a pyrotechnics company that builds fireworks, and I also consult fire investigations.
How long have you done that for?
My current consulting has gone on for several years since I left the Nanook Fire Department in 2014, and before that I worked for that department in arson investigation.
Talk to us about your training specifically in the area of fire investigation.
Well, in 2002, I got my certification from the National Association of Fire Investigators, and then in 2004, I then used that certification to go to work in the town of Nanook in North Dakota to investigate fires and arsons for that department.
Do you have any formal education?
Yes, I have a bachelor's degree in chemistry from Central Iowa.
Have you ever testified in court before as a fire investigating expert?
I have.
Your Honor, at this time we tender Mr. Spengler as an expert in fire investigation.
Okay, is there any objection?
No objection, Your Honor.
Okay, he's an expert.
Mr. Spengler, how are you involved in this case?
I was contacted by Billy Sherman about a week after the burning of the Georgia Theater to conduct an independent investigation of this fire.
Now, before we get into your specific conclusions in this case, talk to the jury about how a fire generally starts.
Well, for any fire to start, you need 4 things. You need a heat source, an oxygen source, a fuel source, and a continuous reaction among these 4 things.
And how does a fire spread?
For a fire to spread, it has to go through an incipient stage where it starts and begins, and then in the growth stage, second stage, it grows exponentially, reaching above 1900 degrees Fahrenheit at point. And once above that temperature, everything in the room will reach auto-ignition temperatures. And then after all the fuel is used up, the fire begins to decay.
So you got a fire, it's burned something down. What type of conclusions are you looking to get out of this?
Well, when investigating the scene of a fire, as an investigator, I'm trying to determine the origin and cause of that fire.
And once you got the point of origin, once you got that information, does that tell you by what method this fire was started?
No. Further investigation and evidence is required beyond the point of origin.
Do you have sufficient facts and data to reach a conclusion, both to the origin of this fire and the cause of this fire?
Yes.
And what was that facts and data?
The facts and data I relied upon was a visual inspection of the theater as soon as I was called. I did a very detailed walkthrough of the theater, looking at everything. And also reviewed the ATF report, which was conducted right after the fire, and reviewing all their evidence and see if it lined up with what I saw in the theater. And I also interviewed witnesses associated with the Georgia Theater.
And what methodology did you apply to reach your conclusions?
Well, I applied the methodology outlined in the National Fire Protection Association's 921 Guide for Fire Investigation. It's considered the gold standard in the fire investigating industry.
Did you apply that methodology reliably?
I did.
And did you reach both your conclusion as to the origin and the cause of this fire to a reasonable degree of scientific certainty?
I did.
What is your conclusion as to both the origin and the cause of this fire?
My conclusion was that the point of origin of the fire was the center front of the Georgia Theater stage, and that the specific cause of that fire was the explosion of acetone paint thinner out of light bulbs kept in the footlights at the front of that stage.
Permission to approach, Your Honor?
Yes.
I'm retrieving what has been already entered into evidence as 2A, showing opposing counsel. Handing the witness the same. Mr. Spengler, I'm going to give you a marker, and if you wouldn't mind, well, if I can find it here, there we go. And if you wouldn't mind, please walk the jury through how you arrived at the conclusion that acetone paint thinner was used as the accelerant in this fire.
Right. Well, first of all, when I got to the stage, the back portion, about to this point, had actually collapsed. And about the collapse point, slightly into the part that had collapsed, you had a spot of acetone that was left over from the explosion. And also at the center front of the stage, you had another spot of acetone. Now, you had footlights on either side of this point, and most significantly, you had extremely deep burn patterns radiating in streaks from the footlights across the stage. This all indicated from the presence of acetone in these two places and the radiating deep burn marks that an accelerant had been used and that it exploded from these points.
Were you yourself able to inspect this stage?
I was able to do a visual inspection of the stage and look at the burn marks myself.
Now, you mentioned these burn marks. Why are these significant to your investigation?
Right, well, the fact that you had a generally burned stage, and then on top of that you had specific streaks of extremely deep burns, indicated that some type of accelerant had been used, and it also refuted the claim of Mr. Johnston that this had been started from a pile of papers.
Were you able to test any samples from this stage?
No, private investigators are not allowed to do sample testing because they don't want anyone that's not a government official testing tampering.
What about the footlights? What can you tell us about those in your investigation?
Well, I pursued looking into the footlights and the clamshells that surrounded them. However, when I went to investigate them, I found that Mr. Beauregard had them destroyed.
Objection, Your Honor, a foundation. Your Honor, may I be heard?
You may.
Your Honor, this witness just testified that our client, Hayden Beauregard, destroyed these footlights without offering any foundation or a source of that information, Your Honor, as to how he came to the conclusion, specifically that it was Mr. Beauregard that destroyed those footlights. And counsel should provide at least minimal foundation for how he obtained this so it doesn't mislead and confuse the jury.
Okay. Counsel?
Mr. Spengler just testified that he was informed of this. However, we would be happy to be laid further foundation.
All right, why don't we do that? Well, let's let him provide. Unless you have anything else, I'm going to let him provide more foundation.
Yes, Your Honor.
Okay, thank you, counsel. Go ahead.
All right, regardless of anyone telling you this, were they destroyed? Did you see that they were gone?
Yes, they were not there when I got there.
And going back to who informed you,
This was part of my interview process, interviewing witnesses associated with the George Theater.
Objection, Your Honor. I would reassert my foundational objection and add a hearsay objection. Your Honor, may I be heard?
You may.
Your Honor, this witness just testified that he was informed of this during this investigation, but when asked for a source by counsel, didn't provide who specifically told him this information. Counsel should either inquire as to the source of this information, or else it should be stricken from the record as it would prejudice the jury.
Okay, counsel, were you getting ready to get into that, or do you have a response?
Into what? I'm a little confused.
Into identifying the source of...
Identifying the source, we can ask one further question. However, the source is not really that important. We can just move on to save time.
Your Honor, may I respond?
You may.
Your Honor, I believe the source of this information is crucial as it implicates our client in the destruction of the footlights, which could lead the jury to conclude that our client was destroying key evidence in this case. This would be highly prejudicial, and he should disclose the source.
Counsel?
Your Honor, again, we're just satisfied that these things were destroyed. It's a minor point whether Mr. Beauregard did in fact order them destroyed. We don't really care. The fact is, we're on a time restraint. We'd be happy to move on.
Okay, I'll do that. I'll sustain the objection and we'll let you move on.
Yes, Your Honor.
Okay.
So these things were in fact destroyed to the point where you could not investigate them, correct?
Yes, they were destroyed by someone, beyond the point of investigation.
So what did you do when you learned they had been destroyed?
After I learned this, I went on with my investigation and looked at other evidence, specifically witnesses.
And what did you learn from those witnesses?
I learned from the witness, Reagan Bewley, that he had seen Mr. Beauregard with broken footlights at his house. Now, this was significant because Mr. Beauregard had ordered that the footlights, these very specific bulbs that were used in this theater, be kept only at his house. So the presence of the footlights being at his house and broken were both access and went to my overall theory that someone had injected paint thinner into these.
So given this, what is your ultimate conclusion as to the method by which this fire was started?
My ultimate conclusion was that someone had injected paint thinner into these footlights kept at Mr. Beauregard's house, and that they had then put them into the sockets at the front of the stage, and then when the footlights were turned on, the filament provided the heat source to ignite this acetone on fire, which then exploded across the stage and set the building on fire.
Thank you, Mr. Spengler. There's nothing further.
All right, thank you, counsel.
Cross-examination, Your Honor.
Yes.
Good evening, Mr. Spengler.
Evening.
When you were first brought on, you were hesitant to even take this case, correct?
That's correct.
You were hesitant because even the passage of a few hours, as you put it, can jeopardize a quality investigation. Is that correct?
That can happen, yes.
And the mere passage of these hours, as you put it, can distract from reaching a reasoned conclusion, right?
It can sometimes, yes.
So you'd agree with me that initially, coming into this case, you came in with a significant handicap, correct?
I did come in with a handicap coming in so late, which is why I had to perform extra investigative methods.
But that's a yes. You had a significant handicap when you began your investigation.
I did. Obviously, I was able to overcome that, but it was difficult.
I understand that's your position, but let's turn to your theory in this case. Your theory is that Hayden Beauregard had to physically inject paint thinner into a glass light bulb, then screw it back into the socket, the paint thinner would be ignited, and then it would be thrown onto the stage on fire. Correct? Is that the general theory that you have in this case?
Correct.
Let's just take the first part of that theory, Mr. Spengler. It's your theory in this case that that's what happened, but you're not aware of a single other case in which paint thinner and light bulbs were used to light anything on fire, are you?
Now, the information concerning other cases is not contained within my sworn affidavit. However, if you are asking me to go outside of that, I can.
Mr. Spengler, You believe that the source of this fire was a timer, correct?
The source of the heat source, yes.
The timer was used to set off the footlight light bulbs. Isn't that your theory?
Yes, the light bulb would turn on a timer, and then that filament, heated filament, would provide the heat source.
And Mr. Spengler, you never actually saw this timer at any point during your investigation, did you?
No, the damage to the theater was too extensive to investigate that.
So that's a no.
No, I was not able to investigate the timer itself.
You relied on the ATF report, correct?
Absolutely.
And you'll agree with me that the ATF report also mentioned no timer, correct?
That is correct. They did not find a timer system in the wreckage.
In your words, you had a moment in your investigation where everything came together regarding your theory, correct?
Yes, there's always that point when you realize that there's enough evidence to prove your hypothesis true.
And that point, when everything came together for you, Mr. Spengler, was when Reagan Bewley told you that Hayden had broken footlights at his house. Isn't that correct?
That's true. That interview is when it all came together.
We'll ask Mr. Bewley about that specific testimony later. But I'd like to turn to what you knew and did not know about Miss Sherman. You interviewed Miss Sherman, didn't you?
I did talk to Miss Sherman, yes.
You didn't know prior to today that Miss Sherman had allegations of embezzlement against her, correct?
I heard talk about it, but embezzlement years ago was not part of my fire investigation.
But just to be clear for the jury, prior to today, you had no idea that Miss Sherman was implicated in any allegations of embezzlement, correct?
Not details, no.
You had no idea about these 2 deposit receipts discussed earlier in the trial, prior to today, did you, Mr. Spengler?
Well, I knew that they were the burned remains contained referenced in the ATF report, but their reference to any prior case, I did not investigate that, no.
And Mr. Spengler, just to be clear for our jury, you knew nothing prior to today of any statements that Miss Sherman had ever made regarding what might happen to her theater. Yes or no, please?
I did not review the court record reference, no.
So that's a no. You had no understanding of these statements prior to today?
No.
Nothing further, Your Honor.
Okay, thank you, counsel. Cross. Cross.
There is no redirect.
Okay, I'm sorry, no other redirect. Thank you. All right, you may be excused. All right, we'll call our next witness.
Your Honor, we call Mr. Reagan Bewley to the stand.
Okay, you've been sworn in, sir.
Yes, Your Honor.
May I proceed, Your Honor?
You may.
Please tell the jury your name.
My name is Reagan Bewley.
Mr. Bewley, what do you do for a living?
I work for Elite Property Management Company, or EPM.
Could you please explain that company to the jury, telling them exactly what it does?
Of course. So EPM buys residential and commercial properties, renovates them and fixes them up, and then sells them for a little bit of profit.
Now I want to ask you about your relationship with the 2 defendants in today's case. First of all, do you know Mr. Beauregard?
Yes, I do. Mr. Beauregard is the owner of EPM.
And do you know Ms. Sherman?
Yes, I do. Ms. Sherman became Mr. Beauregard's partner for the Georgia Theater.
Now, did you ever work at the Georgia Theater with Elite Property Management?
I did.
And could you please describe to us your job at that specific theater?
Of course. So it was my job to make sure that all of the mechanical and electrical issues in the theater were all sorted out, and that all of the day-to-day operations with cleaning and making sure that the theater was in a great condition for performers was all in good condition.
Mr. Bewley, you've been in court all day today, haven't you?
I have.
You've heard about the footlights in that theater, haven't you?
Yes, I have.
Now, does your electrical work in that theater include those footlights?
It absolutely does.
And could you please describe how those footlights are different than any other light in that building?
Of course. So these footlights are antique lights. They're a lot older than all of the other lights in the theater. And because of this, they require a lot more electricity. And furthermore, these lights have a clamshell base. If y'all are the audience in the theater and they're placed on the stage, the clamshell base would face you guys to eliminate any glare and allow for a better display for the performers.
Now, who wanted these particular lights in that theater?
Mr. Beauregard did.
Did Mr. Beauregard ever tell you why?
He just said that they added a good taste to the theater.
Now, if I handed you a document that was a schematic of the floor plan of that theater, would you be able to show us exactly where those footlights were?
I absolutely would.
Do you have Exhibit 2 still on the stand with you?
Yes, I did.
For the record, the witnesses is referencing Exhibit 2A, which has already been admitted into evidence.
Okay.
Now, Mr. Bewley, using this exhibit and just showing the jury, could you please show them exactly where those footlights are located?
Of course. So the stage is right here, and the audience would be right around here. The footlights were located right here in the front of the stage where you see that Mr. Spangler circled.
And could you please, using that exhibit, show the jury how they were wired?
Absolutely. So all of the other footlights in the theater were wired back to this sound and light board right here, which is in the rear balcony where the audience sits. These footlights, because they required a lot more electricity, were wired to this electrical panel in the rear left of the stage.
Thank you. You don't have to use that exhibit anymore. Now, Mr. Bewley, was there any other different ways that that footlight was wired?
Yes, well, it was wired to a lockbox.
And what kind of lock was on this lockbox?
A padlock.
Mr. Bewley, did this padlock require a set of keys or a combination?
It required a set of keys.
Who had those keys?
Well, Mr. Bogart did.
And who told you to install that lockbox on the light switch?
Mr. Bogart.
Could you please explain to us why Mr. Beauregard wanted a lockbox installed onto a switch for some lights?
I think it was to protect them.
Now, was there any other different things that Mr. Beauregard told you to do in changing that configuration that you just described?
So nothing that he had me do, but he did have a timer installed onto the lockbox. And I didn't do this, but everything appeared to be in good working condition with the timer.
Thank you. Now, Mr. Bewley, you also mentioned earlier that these footlights required a very specific type of light bulb. Could you please tell the jury where those light bulbs were kept?
Well, these light bulbs were kept at Mr. Beauregard's house.
Why were they kept at Mr. Beauregard's house and not somewhere else in the Georgia Theater?
Well, because one time there was a performance and one of the band members of the performance dropped a box on the bulbs and broke a few, and Mr. Beauregard got mad and insisted that he have control of where they were, and he put them at his house in order to keep them safe, I believe.
Mr. Bewley, is there anywhere else in that theater that these bulbs could have been safely kept away and out of reach of anyone accidentally breaking them?
Absolutely. There was the partner's office downstairs, the basement, the maintenance closet, which is my maintenance closet, and all of these areas were safe and out of reach of any performers.
But where did you have to go if a light bulb ever broke?
Well, if the light bulb broke, then I would have to get in my car, drive to Mr. Beauregard's house, retrieve the light bulbs, and then drive back. And if a bulb broke a minute before show, I just have to hope to get there in time for the show.
Thank you, Mr. Bewley. Now that we've talked a little bit about those footlights, I'm going to very briefly ask you about elite property management. Now, in the months leading up to the fire, how much time did Mr. Beauregard have you working at other properties other than the Georgia Theater?
Hardly any at all.
And could you please tell the jury why that was?
Yes, Mr. Beauregard expressed that he was extremely stressed and worried about the financial well-being of the theater, and he told me how he was buried in debt with this theater, so my understanding was that he wanted me to do everything that I could at this theater to try to get it back on its feet.
Thank you, Mr. Bewley. No further questions, Your Honor.
Okay. Cross.
Yes, Your Honor. Good evening, Mr. Bewley.
Good evening.
Let's begin with whether Miss Sherman tried to scare Mr. Beauregard. Now, you're aware of the theater's darker, scary history, correct?
I'm aware of the legend, yes.
That includes the history Mr. Beauregard mentioned on direct examination, including that one theater owner was found dead with a rope around his neck.
Yes, that is how the legend goes.
And you observed Miss Sherman try to scare Mr. Beauregard based on this theater's history.
I did. And, I mean, they were best friends and grew up together, and it wasn't uncommon for them to tease each other.
So that's a yes? You observed Miss Sherman try to scare Mr. Beauregard based on the theater's history?
Yes.
In fact, you observed Miss Sherman try to scare Mr. Beauregard on multiple occasions, didn't you?
That is correct.
Now, let's turn to all the burned paper that was found on the stage after the fire. As the maintenance manager for the Georgia Theater, one of your duties was to clean up before you left for the day, wasn't it?
Yes.
And on the night before the fire, you cleaned up around the stage area before you left, didn't you?
I'm pretty sure that I did.
And Mr. Bewley, there is no way that you would have left all that paper on the stage.
I don't believe so. I typically do a very good and thorough job cleaning up.
Now let's turn to Mr. Spangler's theories as to how this fire occurred. Do you recall Mr. Spangler's testimony that when everything came together for his theory was after a conversation with you, wasn't it?
Yes, I heard him say that.
Do you recall Mr. Spangler's testimony that you told him that you saw broken bulbs at Mr. Beauregard's home? Do you remember that testimony?
Yes, I do.
Now, first of all, you never told Mr. Spangler, the expert, that you saw broken bulbs at Mr. Beauregard's home, did you?
I don't remember whether or not I did.
So that's a no? Of all your personal knowledge, you don't remember talking to Mr. Spangler, do you?
Like I said, I don't remember.
And to be clear, you never saw any broken bulbs of any kind at Mr. Beauregard's house, did you?
I don't remember seeing any.
In fact, you never even spoke to Mr. Spangler about this case at all. Yes or no, please?
So this is actually, I can't just answer this yes or no because I'm tied to my affidavit, and I can't give you a simple yes or no. Would you like me to explain?
Well, above your signature, you wrote that you included all material facts, didn't you?
I absolutely did.
And nowhere in your statement do you say that you spoke to Mr. Spangler at all, do you?
No, I don't. And to the extent of my statement, it goes till the day of the fire. And after that, I had plenty of interviews with lots of people, and that's frankly why I ended my statement there, because I just couldn't remember all the people that I had interviews with.
So that's a no in your sworn statement that you reviewed this morning. You don't remember speaking to Mr. Spangler.
I don't remember who all I spoke with after the fire, which is why I didn't include anything for fact, because I wanted to be as honest in my statement as I could.
Now let's turn to what you know about whether Mr. Beauregard injected paint thinner into some light bulbs to set the theater on fire. Now you've been Mr. Beauregard's maintenance manager for multiple years, correct?
Yes, a little over 11 years.
And that includes at the Georgia Theater.
Yes, I was at the Georgia Theater for several years.
Based on all your interactions with Mr. Beauregard, he couldn't change a light switch to save his life, could he?
Well, Mr. Beauregard chose not to change the light switches because that was my job as the maintenance manager.
So that's a no? Mr. Beauregard would never reduce himself to change a light bulb?
No, because that was my job. That's what he paid me for.
Now, you never saw Mr. Beauregard inject paint thinner into any light bulbs, did you?
Not to my knowledge.
You never saw Mr. Beauregard use any paint thinner for any reason, did you?
I don't believe so.
You never saw Mr. Beauregard use any needles that could be used to inject paint thinner into light bulbs.
Any needles?
You never saw Mr. Beauregard with any needles that could be used to inject paint thinner into any light bulbs, did you?
I don't specifically remember him using any needles, but in the 11 years I was with him, I wasn't really paying attention to this, and this was over 5 years ago.
Well, let's turn to the month before the fire. In the month before the fire, you never saw Mr. Beauregard use any needles, did you?
I have no idea whether or not I saw him with any needles. I don't remember it.
And in the month before the fire, to the best of your knowledge, you never saw Mr. Beauregard with any matches or lighters. Yes or no, please?
As I said, this was 5 years ago, and I wasn't really paying attention to whether or not he had any needles or lighters or matches at this time.
But to the best of your knowledge, you never saw Mr. Beauregard with any matches or lighters.
Yes, that is correct. I could give you a definitive I saw him with them.
No further questions, Your Honor.
All right. Anything further for this witness?
Very briefly, Your Honor.
Okay.
Mr. Bewley, do you recall just a minute ago on cross-examination, opposing counsel asking you about whether you saw Mr. Beauregard with certain items?
Yes, I did.
Now, were you constantly watching Mr. Beauregard?
No, I wasn't.
Were you constantly watching him to see if he was holding a lighter?
Absolutely not. I was the maintenance manager. I was focused on what he was paying me to do.
Were you constantly watching him to see if he was holding a meeting?
No, I wasn't.
One last question, Mr. Bogart, or Mr. Mealy, excuse me. Where were the bulbs kept? Just tell us one more time.
Objection, Your Honor. This has already been asked and answered.
Your Honor, this is redirect. I'm allowed to go back into things that have already been testified to. If the closing counsel went into them on cross-examination, which they did go into the bulbs and where they were kept.
Yeah, I'm going to allow counsel. Go ahead.
Yes, Your Honor.
Mr. Bogart, or Mr. Bewley, excuse me, please tell the jury where those bulbs were kept.
All of these bulbs were kept at Mr. Beauregard's house.
Thank you. No further questions.
All right, unless there's anything further, this witness is excused. Okay, counsel?
Your Honor, we call Billy Sherman to the stand.
All right. Sherman, you've been sworn in.
Sorry. Please tell us your name.
My name is Billy Sherman.
Where do you live, Miss Sherman?
Believe it or not, I'm actually from Athens.
Miss Sherman, now that it's your chance to talk to us, I just want to ask you straight out, did you burn down the Georgia Theater?
No, I did not burn down the Georgia Theater.
Did you break into the theater in the early hours of November 12th, 2014?
No, I did not.
Did you go into the partner's office and steal a file off the old partner's desk?
No.
Did you take that file of papers and burn them on the stage?
I did no such thing.
Miss Sherman, were you even inside the theater on November 11th or 12th, 2014?
I was not, and I had not been inside in a very long time.
Now, before we talk more about the fire, I'd like to talk about your background with the Georgia Theater. How long have you known this man right here, Hayden Beauregard?
I've known Hayden since we were kids. We were best friends for a while.
And how did the idea to renovate the Georgia Theater ever come about?
Well, growing up, we both loved to go inside and explore the old buildings inside Athens, you know, all the beautiful old historic buildings. And when we were in high school, we both really got into local music. So we went to lots of concerts, and we even wrote a music column for our school newspaper that got pretty popular. So it was only after college when I realized that we could actually combine our love for historical buildings and our love for local music by turning the old Georgia Theatre into a music venue. And not only would this be profitable, but it would be great for the Athens community.
What personally did you do to ensure that this plan would be successful?
After I finished my MBA, I realized I needed to do lots of research in order to make this successful. So I found several good business models around the United States, and I spent 14 months on the road traveling the US and visiting these different music halls and venues to get a good idea of what I would have to do to make it successful.
And after these 14 months on the road, what did you do?
I got back to Athens, and one of my first tasks was to introduce the idea to Hayden, because knowing our shared past, I knew he would be interested.
And were you able to get Hayden on board with your business venture?
Not initially. At first, Hayden didn't quite see how it could be a successful operation long term. Plus, he was really occupied at the time with a property management company he'd just started. But once I explained how the theatre could be a successful operation, he got on board, and we shook hands and began the process.
And what was Hayden Beauregard's role in the startup of the theatre?
He agreed to provide the startup funds.
And where did he get these startup funds from?
He got them by taking out a loan. It was a second mortgage.
Ms. Sherman, when did the theatre open for business?
Opening night was February 9th, 2012.
And in the months when the theatre first opened, how did the business perform?
It did pretty well, actually. We had packed crowds on a regular basis, and after a couple months we were able to get some bigger name artists in there for shows.
And were there ever months where the theatre would lose money?
Of course.
And why is that?
Sometimes there'd be equipment malfunctions, sometimes we wouldn't get the crowd we anticipated, sometimes our bands would back out last minute, things like that.
Now, from what you could tell, based on your relationship with Hayden Beauregard, Did Mr. Beauregard seem to understand this concept?
No, I tried explaining this many times, that one of the primary things they teach you in business school is that in your first year or even 2 years of starting a business, you're going to be in the red for a little while. It's just what happens when you take risk. And of course, running a theatre for musical bands is no exception to this. But I tried explaining this to him, that we were actually doing pretty reasonably comparing to the extent of the business we were starting, but he never understood.
And how did Mr. Beauregard react when you tried to explain this to him?
Well, eventually he reacted by filing a partnership dissolution lawsuit against me, claiming that the reason the theatre wasn't doing so successfully those first couple months was because I was stealing from it.
I'd like to talk about that partnership dissolution lawsuit. What exactly was Hayden Beauregard seeking in this lawsuit?
He wanted to take full control of the theatre and run me out of the business.
Now, it's been said that he brought this lawsuit against you because there were allegations of you embezzling from the Georgia Theater. Ms. Sherman, were these allegations true?
No, they're absolutely not true. I never wanted $1 from the theatre other than what the partnership draws. I would never do that. I wanted to see the theatre succeed. Why would I take money from it if I wanted it to do well?
And what about that $5,000 deposit we heard about earlier?
That was a personal loan I made to a friend. My friend Roger was moving and he needed some money to move, so I lent him some money and he paid me back. It had nothing to do with the theatre.
Objection, Your Honor. Foundation of this witness's claim that Roger Stevens paid her back. May I be heard?
You may.
Your Honor, in this witness's sworn statement, she says that she's only guessing that Roger Stevens paid her back. She has no foundation to make this claim.
Your Honor, if I may, that goes to weight, not admissibility.
Your Honor, this absolutely goes to foundation. I believe that counsel should offer foundation as to why this witness knows. Is it a text message? Is it a conversation? Did Roger Stevens even contact her at all to try and tell her that he paid her back, supposedly?
Counsel?
Your Honor, I would be happy to lay that foundation.
Okay, let's get to that then. Thank you, counsel.
Yes, Your Honor.
And how did you reach this explanation as to why this might have been a loan from some friend?
Well, I did loan money to my friend Roger, and I gave him a deposit slip, and that was how he was going to pay me back, was by putting it in my bank, and he returned, the exact amount of money that I lent him was later put into my bank account, and I received a text later that I figured must have been from Roger. Now, I understand that I had my phone lost around this time, so all my contacts were lost. So I wasn't sure at first who it was from, but at this point, I'm pretty sure it was Roger.
Objection, Your Honor. Foundation to this hearsay statement of the text message. This witness just admitted that she had no idea it was Roger Stevens. Your Honor, may I approach you with a copy of this text message so you can see for yourself?
That'd be counsel.
Your Honor, may I see this exhibit before he hands it?
Absolutely, counsel. Exhibit 7.
Oh, yes, thank you.
Okay. Thank you, counsel.
Now, Your Honor, I want to draw your attention to one specific line on there.
Okay.
Who dis? That was this witness's response when she supposedly received a text from Mr. Stevens. She has no foundation to be able to make this claim that Mr. Stevens supposedly deposited the money, and that's why she has foundation. In addition, Your Honor, this is all hearsay, this text message.
Your Honor, if I may respond to those each in their
You may.
turn. She testified that the reason that she stated these things was that she believed that this deposit receipt was from a loan that she had given to her friend. She's not asserting for any definitive fact that it was in fact Roger, but that was her belief at the time, and that was her explanation, her defense of why it was not embezzlement. As to hearsay, Your Honor, this goes to effect on the listener. Furthermore, there's actually no declarant. We don't know who that is.
Your Honor, counsel just summed it up perfectly. They don't know who it is. And furthermore, Your Honor, this goes directly towards truth of the matter asserted. Time and time again, this witness has said, this is proof that Roger Stevens deposited the money. It's classic truth of the matter asserted. And going back to foundation, Your Honor, this witness is creating a conclusion based on prior knowledge. And that prior knowledge doesn't have sufficient foundation, and it's based on hearsay.
Your Honor, if I may respond.
Okay.
In all of this, I don't believe these text messages are even relevant to respond to any kind of objection or to understand anything about the foundation of Roger Stevens. The truth is, I agree with Counselor. These text messages show us nothing. They're irrelevant. What matters is that Billy Sherman, believed that these deposit receipts were the result of a loan to a friend named Roger Stevens. That was her belief. It is not a definitive fact, and he is welcome to address that on cross-examination if he would like to.
You just made my point. Counsel, I think you're making some excellent points. I'm going to let you make them on cross-examination, okay?
Yes, Your Honor.
All right, thank you. You may proceed.
Ms. Sherman, if you wouldn't mind explaining again where you believed this $5,000 slip came from.
I made it, the slip was from Roger. It's the only person I made any loans to at that time.
And did you have any explanation as to why the other bank deposit slip was only $9,000 as opposed to the $14,000 amount?
Yes, that other slip was made to the theatre, and many people thought that that wasn't really the amount that we should have gotten that night because we had a big concert. But the reasoning for that is that that night we had a bouncer call in sick right before the show, and he wasn't there, and pretty sure lots of kids got in free. That's why we didn't get the money we had anticipated.
And did this partnership lawsuit that Hayden Beauregard brought against you ever result in a hearing before a judge?
It did.
And what happened in this hearing?
Well, in this hearing, Hayden brought all these documents that I'd never seen before, and this was the first time I was ever really accused of embezzling, and I was so shocked that I would be accused of stealing by anyone, frankly, but much less by my business partner, my old business partner and childhood friend. And I was so overwhelmed by everything that happened in that hearing, and when the judge awarded full control of the theatre to Hayden based off of those things, which I did and still firmly believe to not be true, I was just completely shocked, and I did overreact in that moment. Looking back 6 years later, I am sorry for what I said and the way I behaved.
And after you overreacted, like you said in that court, what did the judge do in regard to you and you and Hayden Beauregard's partnership?
Well, Hayden was awarded full control of the theatre.
And what happened to you?
I was ordered night in jail.
And were you ever, were you ever ordered to hand over your keys to the judge?
I was. I handed them right over to him that very day.
And after this hearing, Ms. Sherman, did you ever go inside the Georgia Theater again?
No, I never, ever did.
And did you ever have any kind of communication with Mr. Beauregard after that hearing?
Yes, I got several letters from Hayden over the following months.
And what were these letters telling you?
Well, they were saying that he was out of money, even though he could no longer blame me for the losses of the business anymore. The business was still failing, and he was begging me to co-sign on some new loans.
And did you agree to co-sign on these loans?
No, I couldn't bring myself to do that because I completely disagreed with the direction that he wanted to take the theatre. I didn't think it would be good for the theatre's success in the long run, so I couldn't bring myself to sign them.
Thank you, Ms. Sherman. Now I'd like to talk about the fire itself. What were you doing the night before the fire started?
I was just at home watching the telly.
And how did you first find out about the fire?
I got a call that morning from Reagan, our maintenance supervisor.
What were you doing when you got this call?
I was just at my house.
Was the theater insured, Ms. Sherman?
Yes, it was.
And who was in charge of handling the theater's insurance?
Hayden always took care of the insurance.
How much was the theater insured for?
Originally, it was just for $1 million, but Hayden increased it to $15 million.
Ms. Sherman, you heard earlier Mr. Beauregard testify that he was out of time. Would you be able to tell us whether you were out of time on paying back any kind of loan leading up to the fire?
I was not.
You heard him testify earlier that he was out of money. Would you be able to tell us if you were ever running out of money before the fire?
No, I was pretty financially stable.
And were you out of options in what you were going to do with your financial state?
No, in fact, quite the opposite. I had several investors come up to me asking for my input on some new musical theatre things that they wanted me to start helping them with, new projects. So, in fact, I had many, many business opportunities in my future and still do.
Thank you. No further questions.
Okay. Counsel?
Good evening, Ms. Sherman.
Good evening, sir.
Let's begin with the times you felt your theater was taken away from you. Now, as you mentioned on direct examination, Mr. Beauregard filed the lawsuit against you.
Yes, he did.
He accused you of embezzling.
He did accuse me of this, which I believe, of course, is not true.
Now, you admit, though, that there was a $9,000 deposit into the theater's account that you made.
That was made into my account. I think it was $5,000 into my account.
As I stated, it was a $9,000 deposit that you made into the theater's account.
Oh, into the theater. Sorry, I misunderstood you. Yes, there was.
And there was a $5,000 deposit that was made into your own personal account that you deny making.
Yes, that must have been Roger returning the money that I gave him to help him move.
We'll talk about Rogers specifically contacting you a little bit later, but you're telling this jury that Mr. Stevens went directly to your bank and deposited directly in your account?
Yes, he did. He's sort of an eccentric fellow. If this tells you anything about him, he's actually off the grid right now. I don't even know where he is.
So Mr. Stevens isn't even in this courtroom here today?
No, I've actually tried getting in touch with him, but he's just off the grid. I mean, that tells you how eccentric he is. I don't know how many people any of us know that just go off the grid.
Now let's get back to your original supposed conversation with Mr. Stevens. Because Mr. Stevens never contacted you on the day he supposedly made that deposit to tell you he made it.
Indeed, he does not. He's a rather strange fellow.
So $5,000 just mysteriously showed up in your account and you didn't even think anything about it?
I wasn't paying attention to that at the moment. It took me a while before I noticed that it was my account. But once I put the pieces together, I was pretty sure that was Roger, of course. So it's exactly something Roger would do.
Because as you mentioned on direct examination, Mr. Stevens sent you a text message at some point, right?
Yes, he did. At least I'm pretty sure it was him.
And you just assumed this was Mr. Stevens because you said, "Who, this?"
Objection, Your Honor. Hearsay.
Your Honor, I'm not offering this for the truth of the matter asserted, but rather for the effect on the listener. In this case, Ms. Sherman, and how she reacted to not being shocked at all that $5,000 appeared inside of her account. In fact, counsel already admitted this isn't very relevant for their own case.
Your Honor, if I may respond, they haven't established that there was a causal link between, say, who this and anything that happened with Roger Stevens. They haven't even established that it was Roger Stevens who texted her.
Your Honor, actually, counsel established that causal link on direct examination because they tried to contend that due to this alleged text message, she was able to conclude that somehow Mr. Stevens randomly deposited $5,000 into her account.
Your Honor, if I may, I actually objected to relevance as to these text messages. I don't know who they're from. I don't really care who they're from because they're not relevant. They don't make any fact of consequence more or less probable. They're only going to confuse the jury as to what's going on.
I appreciate your points, but I agree with counsel that they can be admitted to show the impact on the listener. So go ahead, counsel.
Thank you, Your Honor. So going back to my question, Ms. Sherman, $5,000 just mysteriously shows up in your account, and you don't even find out about it until weeks later.
That's true. I didn't have one of those like apps that notifies you when you get those sort of messages or whatever, so I didn't notice for a while. And the reason, by the way, that I said who dis was because I wanted to make sure who it was, but he didn't text back.
So you got a $5,000 deposit from your friend, and he's not even a contact on your phone? This is someone you loaned $5,000 to?
No, I actually explained this earlier. I'd actually replaced my phone, and I didn't have any of my old contacts in my phone, so I didn't have people's names with their phone numbers.
Of course,
and one more thing. About the $5,000, I was there's only one person that would have given me $5,000, since that was exactly what I lent to Roger, so it seemed pretty obvious to me that it was Roger.
Of course, Ms. Sherman. Now let's talk about that court hearing you brought on direct examination. Now, you got mad at that court hearing, didn't you?
I did get upset. I lost my temper.
In your own words, that stupid trial judge took your court away.
Yes, I did say that. I shouldn't have said that. I know it's rather inappropriate. It was and sort of is my personal opinion that that judge was very unfair to me that day. I don't call many people stupid, I assure you.
So that's a yes?
Yes, I did call him stupid.
Because the judge went on to have you arrested and jailed.
He did.
And then you told the jury exactly what was going to happen. I won't have my life's work taken away from me. Isn't that right?
Yes, I did say that. I had put a lot of time into this theatre, and I was upset that it was being taken away from me on account of charges I believed were completely false.
So that's a yes?
Yes.
And you went on to say, if Beauregard's left in charge of the theater will go up in smoke.
Yes, I did say that. It's a figure of speech, of course, meaning that Hayden didn't understand the business side of things, and there was no way that he would be able to run it successfully without my business advice, which is, it's true, the business didn't do well once I left.
Ms. Sherman, I wasn't asking what you meant by those comments. I simply asked whether you said those. And
I did
you
say them, and
didn't you?
I wanted to say what I meant by those.
Of course, Ms. Sherman, because you ended things by saying, if I can't have the theater, no one can have the theater.
Yes, that was another outburst I said, and of course by that I meant that, well, for one, I was a little angry in that moment, but also that it wasn't going to be successful with just him running it, which is obviously true. It didn't do very well.
Nevertheless, Ms. Sherman, you continued to be involved with the theater, and you wanted to run your consulting business out of it, didn't you?
Yes, that was an idea. The investors had come to me, and that was a possibility of things I could do later on, was maybe eventually buy back the theatre at a lower price once we had done the settlement, and then I could run it from there. That was a definite possibility.
We'll talk about those investors a little bit later. But your lawyers, they told you that you didn't have a hope of winning that trial.
They did say that, but I'm a pretty hopeful person, and I wanted to try to see the theatre through into a more successful situation.
And as you mentioned, it was then that investors across the South started contacting you.
They did. I guess they saw what I had done with the theatre and saw that I knew how to run those sort of music venues, and so they started contacting me. I was kind of surprised.
So once that started happening, you went over to your insurance company and you started demanding, I want my money.
Sorry, are you talking about like after the fire?
After the fire, you went over to the insurance company and you went over and you said, I want my money.
Yes, I did say that. I thought that $15 million would be very, very nice for my business that I'm starting. But let me assure you that if I don't get that $15 million today, I still have a lot of investors lined up, and I'll still get to do all the projects with starting new venues regardless, because I have those investors.
But Ms. Sherman, working with investors, that's not what you want.
Of course it's not preferable, but it'll still work.
With this $15 million, you plan on cutting out all investors so you can have sole management of your own business. Yes or no, please?
Well, sure.
No further questions, Your Honor.
Okay.
I won't be redirecting them.
Okay, if there's no further questions for this witness, you're excused.
Thank you.
All right, anything to address before closing statements?
None, Your Honor.
No, Your Honor, I'm ready to proceed.
All right. Proceed.
If I can't have this theater, no one can have this theater. Those were the threatening words shouted by Ms. Sherman in open court. And the evidence today has proven that Ms. Sherman made good on that promise and burned down the Georgia Theater. May it please the court, counsel, members of the jury. This business dispute began in April of 2013 when Hayden Beauregard suspected Billy Sherman of embezzling. After a full house concert at the Georgia Theater, Ms. Sherman made 2 deposits instead of 1. One into the theater's account and the other into her own personal account. And what was her explanation? A $5,000 loan to someone named Roger Stevens, who supposedly went directly to her bank and deposited directly in her account. Members of the jury, when you loan money to your friends, do you know anyone who goes directly to your bank and deposits directly into your account when they pay you back? It just doesn't make sense. After this, Mr. Beauregard filed a lawsuit against Ms. Sherman. After hearing the evidence, the judge put Ms. Sherman in court. And it was then that Ms. Sherman told everyone what was going to happen. She was arrested and she was jailed. She said, "I won't have my life's work taken away from me. If Beauregard is left in charge of the theater will go up in smoke." Recall Nolan Clark's testimony that these threats against the theater continued up until the day of the fire. Ms. Sherman continued to say, if she couldn't have the theater, no one could have the theater. Even after this, Mr. Beauregard offered her settlement offer after settlement offer, but she declined all of them until the trial was approaching, and her lawyers told her that she wasn't going to win. It was around this same time that investors across the South started contacting Ms. Sherman, asking for her help to rebuild and renovate theaters. It was then that Ms. Sherman realized two things. First, she couldn't have the theater anymore. And second, she didn't need the theater anymore. So when Nolan Clark went to Ms. Sherman and asked her if he could borrow her keys to her car, she said yes. Mr. Clark took his key, put it underneath the mat, the same keys that could open the doors to the Georgia Theater. Ms. Sherman took those keys, went down to the Georgia Theater, and went into her old office. She tied a noose and hung it on the ceiling in honor of how the old partners had ended things. Recall Nolan Clark's testimony that when he heard about the noose Hayden Beauregard had seen, he felt compelled to check his car. And what did he find? The rope in his trunk was gone. Ms. Sherman then went down to the theater stage. She put down the embezzlement file and she lit it on fire. That's exactly how expert Elijah Johnston explained that this fire started. And that's on Exhibit 8 as well. The ATF report confirms that there were scattered papers across the theater stage. Billy Sherman was a bitter, vindictive, exposed embezzler. And the evidence today has proven all of that. Members of the jury, we have more than met our burden here today. When you go back to the jury room, you'll have this verdict form to complete. We ask that you select the box on top and return a verdict in favor of Hayden Beauregard and rule against Billy Sherman. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, counsel. Hear from you, counsel.
Your Honor, before they begin, I would ask that all the remaining time be reserved for rebuttal.
Okay, sure.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Just clarify, he was referring to his closing argument he just delivered.
Correct. Okay.
This picture really isn't much to look at. It's just a mound of ash and rubble that once stood tall as the vibrant centerpiece of our historic town. Members of the jury, we can all be thankful for something that's not pictured here today. And that's the damage that very easily could have been done. Think about it. One stray ember and a slight breeze that morning could have meant that Horton's drugstore or the Waffle House, one building over, would meet the same fiery fate as the theater, possibly even claim a life, if not multiple lives. It was so easy to look past that today. Because when it came down to it, that thought didn't even cross Hayden Beauregard's mind as he carefully attached the last accelerant-filled light bulb to the footlight base on that stage and walked out of that theater satisfied. Because in that moment, Hayden Beauregard no longer saw the Georgia Theater as his business, or even as a building. To him, it was the last remaining solution to an otherwise unsolvable problem. It was the kind of thinking we would only expect to see in someone who was hopelessly desperate, someone who was out of time, out of money, and out of options. The members of the jury, this case is clear. No matter how many directions these lawyers try to go today, when you go back in that jury room, you're only going to have to answer one question. And it's not who is more invested in the Georgia Theater Project. It's not who is on better behavior in some hearing 6 years ago. The only question you're going to have to answer is who started that fire. And today, members of the jury, the preponderance of the evidence, if not more, has shown that that person was Hayden Beauregard. Let's walk through how the evidence answers that question. First of all, if you want to know who started the fire, you have to know who had access. The theater was started, and the fire was started, in the early hours of the morning, meaning that the person who started the fire had to have a key. And who is the only one of these two people being accused today who had a key? Hayden Beauregard. Billy Sherman gave her key to the judge at that partnership hearing a year before the fire. And what's their excuse for how Billy Sherman might have gotten the key? Oh, Billy Sherman must have stolen it off of Nolan Clark's keychain. And they honestly expect you to believe that Billy Sherman had some master plan to wait until Nolan Clark got home from work. In the few minutes that he was home, sneak out to his car, steal the key, jimmy-rig the car so that it wouldn't start, all while going completely undetected. And as if that's not enough, we've heard from the only expert whose pay does not entirely depend upon the outcome of this case, that the only plausible cause of the fire was from the light bulbs exploding and igniting an accelerator. And even if Hayden Beauregard wasn't the only person who had access to the theater, Hayden Beauregard was the only person in the 7 billion population world who had specific lock and key access to those footlights. And think about what they're trying to say. Billy Sherman set this fire, all while leaving behind all this evidence, the incriminating documents found on the stage, all the superstitious items that were left in the downstairs office, according to Mr. Beauregard. Members of the jury, when you walked into this courtroom today, you didn't leave your common sense by the door. And it simply does not stand up to common sense, let alone preponderance of the evidence that Billy Sherman set this fire. But what does make sense? Hayden Beauregard was getting desperate. He was getting letters about his home that was going into default. He was running out of time. So he tried to save the theater. He tried marketing it differently with weddings and movies and that sort of thing, but that didn't work. He tried keeping Sherman out of the business. That didn't work. He tried getting Sherman to co-sign on some loans. That didn't work. But in the end, he was out of money. The way he saw it, he was out of options. Except for one. Members of the jury, it is for all of these reasons that we ask you to find the only verdict that is supported logically by the evidence and by common sense. And that is a verdict in favor of Billy Sherman. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, counsel. We'll give you your rebuttal time.
Thank you, Your Honor. Before I begin, may I inquire to the time I have remaining?
Timekeepers?
53 seconds.
You both agree on 53 seconds?
Yeah,
is that correct? Okay, great. Go ahead, counsel.
Ms. Siago just brought up 3 points. Desperate, out of time, and out of options. Well, members of the jury, I sense you're about to notice a common trend. Because he wasn't desperate. He had a settlement plan in place. He wasn't out of time. He had a settlement plan in place. And he wasn't out of options. He had a settlement plan in place. Hayden Beauregard wasn't out of options. He wasn't desperate, and he wasn't running out of time. He had the plan. Everything was figured out. He was going to pay off his debts, sell the Georgia Theater. He never needed to burn it down. But what happened on the day everything was scheduled to happen? Ms. Sherman burned the theater. Don't forget her statements. I won't have my life's work taken away from me. If Beauregard is left in charge of the theater will go up in smoke. If I can't have the theater, no one will have the theater. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, counsel. All right, well, before we do anything else, I think these two amazing teams deserve a round of applause. Okay, I'm going to fast track our scoring evaluators and get them out of here so they can start doing their jobs. All right, and I'll remind the scoring evaluators, and not that I need to because they're all experienced, they may not confer when completing their score sheet or the Outstanding Attorney and Witness Awards. Okay, so yes. Oh, yeah, we're going to spend some time together. Yeah, they told me that we need to make this fast, but this is the finals and I'm a judge and I do what I want. And so, thank you, Dean. I do want to thank the Dean here for letting us be here at the University of Georgia Law School. Now, I'm from Georgia, and I'm a little biased, but I think UGA Law School is one of the finest institutions in the United States. So we are thrilled to be here at this beautiful, beautiful law school. As I said, my name is Stephen Dillard. I'm the Chief Judge of the Court of Appeals of Georgia. This is a little unusual for me. I'm an appellate judge, so I'm not normally sitting as a trial judge, but this is always a lot of fun. This is my 5th national competition. And I mean this sincerely. This is one of the best rounds I have seen since I've started being involved with high school mock trial. These two teams were absolutely incredible. The preparation, the witnesses, the objections, the responses, I mean, all just throughout the round. I really thought you guys both did an incredible job. So I want to commend you for that. Now let's get back to business. All right, are there any disputes that we need to go over? Any concerns about any material rules violations?
None, Your Honor.
Okay, none. Do we have any timing issues from our outstanding timekeepers over here? We are in complete agreement. I love this. This is always that's always what I like to hear. Okay, so at this point, I'm going to leave and come back here. But I do want to do this. Usually, as you know from participating in the prior rounds, we have a Star Witness Award. I don't think y'all have those certificates, do you? All right. So we're going to do this because this was my idea and I like it. I'm going to give you each 2 blank sheets of paper. You are going to fill the Star Awards out, which we'll give back when we come back. And then what you're going to do is you're going to give those to me. I am then going to give those to Michael Nixon, our director, and we are going to mail you the certificates. And we apologize that we didn't have it. We think that is an important part of what we do, especially when they give awards to each other, the professionalism involved. I say this, and you guys are a new audience. I've had to give 4 orientation sessions. In addition to presiding today, I'm the special consultant to the Georgia High School mock trial competition. And so I got to be the consultant here at National, and I had to give directions and instructions to everyone. And one of the things I tell them at the beginning is, I think, as a former lawyer and now judge, that high school mock trial is one of the best things we do as lawyers. It is one of the best things we do as a bar because we are investing in the future. Whether or not these kids ever go on to, or consider law school, they get an introduction to the American judicial system, our rule, the way our government operates, our tripartite system of government, and just civics in general and professionalism. And it gives them also opportunities for public speaking. And I got to tell you, all of these folks are going to be dynamite by the time that they're already dynamite. So we've got a bunch of future public speakers and maybe even a few future lawyers. So anyway, I've just been really impressed with this group. I don't normally get to judge. I'm in the back room, so it's fun to be able to come here and judge in the final round. But I do want to take a moment just to thank all of the parents, grandparents, supporters, friends, whatever reason you're here, thank you for supporting these outstanding students in this competition. So thank you for being here. I guess I'm going to go just step outside, but we are going to move you quickly. I think there's going to be transportation. Is that right? I see somebody from the National Board. We're going to move them quickly in a minute, but I think they want to wait until Bonnie comes back. Is there anything else? I'm looking on my form. I don't see anything else I need to do. So I'm going to retire, and then we're going to come back in just a bit. But thank you very much.
Thank you, Your Honor.
brother. It was nice.
Great job.